My daughter trusted her boyfriend so much that she left him with me for 4 days, but he turned out to be a bad boy I had to bring up. There are silences you grow used to. The kind that settle into the wallpaper, hide behind the ticking clock, breathe softly between folded laundry and the slow boil of a kettle. They aren't loud or cruel, just persistent. My house is full of them. It has been almost 7 years since the world split open and stitched itself back together in a smaller shape. That's how I describe my husband's death when I need to. We lost him, I say. Or he passed, gently. But the truth is, something collapsed inside me the day I stood in that hospital hallway and realized I would never again hear his laugh coming from the bathroom while he shaved. That small, stupid laugh that used to irritate me. Since then, everything has been muted. Not sad exactly, just flat. My daughter is the only color left in the picture. Anya, 22. Sharp, quick, and always 2 steps ahead. I raised her alone for most of her life, even before her father was gone. She's always been the one who knew what she wanted before anyone else had finished the question. Lately, she's been in love. That's what she called it, over tea one Sunday morning. You'll like him, Mama. He's kind and calm, and he doesn't pretend to be someone he's not. I didn't answer. I just nodded and passed her the sugar, trying to remember the last time I'd heard her speak about someone like that. Her eyes were brighter than I'd seen in years. His name was Ilya. I learned this while drying the dishes. She mentioned it casually, like a side note, as if it hadn't already embedded itself somewhere in my mind. 2 weeks later, I met him. He came with her for dinner. She was running late, as always, and he arrived first. I opened the door and he stood there, too tall for the porch light. There was a hesitance in his posture, not shy, not awkward. Something quieter. He had the kind of presence that didn't demand attention, but didn't go unnoticed either. Hello. Thank you for having me, he said, his voice steady. He wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense. But something about him made me stand still longer than I meant to. Broad shoulders, warm hands, a face that hadn't yet decided if it belonged to a man or a boy. And his eyes, I can't describe them without sounding like I'm reaching for a novel I read too young. But they stayed with me, even after he looked away. The dinner was uneventful. Anya talked. He listened. I watched. After they left, I stood by the sink longer than necessary. The sponge soaked in hot water until my fingers wrinkled. I told myself it was just that he reminded me of youth, of something I had once, briefly, and then packed away. Then the message came. Anya had a last-minute business trip. Brussels. Something with new vendors, flight chaos, and deadlines no one else could meet. Mom, can he stay at yours for 2 nights? Just 2. He's got renovation at his place, no water, and it's only temporary. I promise. I hesitated. I could feel it, that quiet tug in my stomach that whispered no without explanation. But I said yes, because what reason could I give that wouldn't sound ridiculous? Because I trust her. Because I don't know how to say no to her when she sounds tired. The first night was easy. He came after dinner. I'd prepared the guest room. Fresh towels, new sheets. I don't remember the last time I'd had a guest overnight, but it felt strange folding the corners of a bed someone else would sleep in. Not family, not mine. We barely spoke that night. He poured himself tea and asked if I wanted any. I declined. My stomach had been quiet all day, coiled into itself. I sat on the couch, reading the same page for 20 minutes. His footsteps were soft. Measured. The kind that made you forget someone was there until they weren't. I went to bed early. Told him to make himself at home. He thanked me again. Said goodnight from the hallway. I heard the door of the guest room close. Heard the faint creak of the mattress. And then nothing. Morning came with sunlight I hadn't asked for. I moved through the routine like choreography, open curtains, water the plant, boil water, wash cup. My hands were automatic. He emerged a little later. Hair damp from the shower, t-shirt clean, but slightly wrinkled from a bag. He apologized for using the last of the coffee. I told him not to worry. It felt domestic in a way that unsettled me. By afternoon, we were moving in separate rhythms. He read a book on the porch. I trimmed herbs in the garden. At one point, I looked up and saw him watching me. Not overtly, not lingering. Just aware. It was enough to make me look down, cut the basil too short, and retreat inside. That evening, I was in the kitchen when Anya's message arrived. Emergency reroute. I have to stay 4 days instead of 2. I'm so sorry. I love you. I owe you. I read it 3 times. I don't know what I felt exactly. Not frustration. Not concern. Something else. Something that slid under my ribs and stayed there. He was in the living room on his phone, bare feet tucked under him like he belonged here. I didn't tell him about the message right away. Instead, I stood by the counter, one hand gripping the edge, staring at the wall where the paint was just starting to peel. I hadn't noticed that before. I imagined the next 4 days stretched out like a quiet field I didn't know how to cross. Nothing had happened. Nothing would happen. But something was already beginning. The kettle clicked. Water boiled. The house was warm. He looked up at me from the couch. His voice soft. Everything okay? I nodded. Smiled. Just tired. He nodded back. Said nothing. But his eyes, they stayed on me for just one moment longer than they should have. And I felt it. Somewhere inside me, something had shifted. There was no dramatic shift in the air, no sudden gesture that marked the beginning of the unraveling. Just smaller things. A rhythm that changed. The morning after Anya's message, I woke early. Too early. I lay in bed listening to the soft sounds of the house, its familiar creaks and occasional humming pipes. But there was another sound, quieter, closer. The low murmur of his voice through the guest room door. He was on a call, I think. Something about a meeting that was postponed, a laugh that didn't quite match the tone of his words. I didn't listen on purpose. I just stayed very still. When I walked into the kitchen, he was already making coffee. He turned and smiled like we had done this every day for years. You're up early, he said. I shrugged. Couldn't sleep. He didn't ask why. The silence between us had changed. It was no longer absence. It was filled with something I didn't have a name for yet. I reached for a mug and our hands brushed. It wasn't the touch itself that made me pause. It was the way neither of us moved away. That morning passed slowly. He read. I pretended to. In the hallway, we passed too closely. In the living room, he sat too near. There was always a reason. Always an explanation. But my body noticed what my mind tried to dismiss. I was more aware of my breath. Of fabric against my skin. Of the space between his shoulder and mine. He didn't flirt. He didn't even look too long. That would have made it easier to resist. But he was kind. Steady. And still. Like he was waiting for something. That evening we had dinner together. Nothing special. Pasta, garlic bread, a simple salad. He offered wine. I said yes. It's good for sleep, I joked. He smiled. I think you just like the excuse. I did. The wine loosened something in me. Not recklessness. Just the tension that had been holding me upright for too many days. We talked more than usual. I told him a story about Anya's childhood, one she wouldn't want me to repeat. He laughed, genuinely. And then he told me something about his mother and how he once built her a bookshelf with his bare hands, even though it stood crooked for years. I liked that. I liked the way he remembered things with warmth. After dinner, we stayed in the kitchen, still sipping. The light above us was soft, golden. He leaned on the counter. I leaned on the opposite one. You know, he said, you don't seem old enough to have a daughter my age. I raised an eyebrow. That's either a compliment or a warning. He smiled. Just an observation. The space between us felt closer than it had. I said something then, I don't remember what, but I know I turned to set my glass down, and in that motion, he stepped forward. Not a lot. Just enough that I felt it. Heat. Not from the wine. Not from the room. From him. I looked up. His eyes met mine, and in them I saw restraint. So tightly held, it almost trembled. I stepped away first. But the air didn't go back to normal. He went to bed early. I stayed in the kitchen, cleaning what didn't need to be cleaned. I moved slowly. I listened to his footsteps overhead, the weight of him in the guest room. In my own bed, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt his presence. The next day, I didn't put on my usual clothes. I wore something softer. Something that made me feel seen even if no one was supposed to see it. He noticed. I know he did. He didn't say anything, but his gaze lingered a second too long. Later that afternoon, he stood behind me while I watered the plants in the kitchen. Close. His hand brushed my shoulder when he reached for a towel. I flinched. He didn't move away immediately. Sorry, he said. Didn't mean to startle you. But I wasn't startled. I was unprepared. That evening, he cooked. He set the table with quiet care. We poured more wine. The tension was almost unbearable, but neither of us acknowledged it. We spoke of weather, books, travel. But under it all, something curled hot and slow. After dinner, we moved to the couch. Not close. Not touching. But the electricity between us was undeniable. He turned to me, opened his mouth to speak. His phone buzzed. He read the message. His expression changed, not with alarm, but with finality. He looked at me, held my gaze. Anya's coming back early, he said. 2 more days. There was no surprise in his voice, only something resolute. Time moves fast, he added, almost to himself. I didn't answer. I couldn't. Because something in his voice told me, whatever we were avoiding, he had stopped avoiding it. And so had I. By the time the morning sun filtered through the curtains, something fundamental had shifted. I woke up slowly, as if my body already knew that the day wasn't going to follow the usual script. The light was golden, warm, almost mocking. I sat on the edge of the bed, holding the fabric of my nightgown between my fingers, staring at the wall without seeing it. Downstairs, Ilya was already in the kitchen. I heard the soft clatter of cutlery, the faint rush of water in the sink. When I walked in, he looked up from the stove and smiled with a gentleness that made something inside me stutter. Hungry? He asked, lifting a pan. I nodded. My voice was somewhere far away. Always. We ate in silence, broken only by the scrape of forks and the occasional soft exchange. He told me the coffee was better today. I told him the eggs were overcooked. We both smiled like people pretending nothing lived beneath the surface. But everything had changed. His presence filled the house now. Not in the way of things misplaced, but in the way heat lingers after the fire dies. His jacket on the chair. His toothbrush by the sink. His scent, faint but unmistakable, woven into the fabric of the couch where he had stretched the night before. The glances were no longer careful. His hand brushed my back when I reached for a plate. His fingers paused on mine when we exchanged a glass. Every moment stretched, lengthened, became something it wasn't meant to be. And I let it. I told myself it was harmless. That night, he suggested a film. Something old, black and white, with subtitles that forced us to stay quiet, focused. We sat on the couch, a cushion between us. But somewhere in the middle, it fell. Neither of us moved to fix it. When his arm rested behind me, not touching but close, my breath changed. Shallow. Hesitant. I didn't lean in, but I didn't pull away either. He spoke once, during the film. Just one line. You seem different when you're not trying to be strong. I didn't ask what he meant. I didn't want to hear it aloud. Later, we shared a drink. Just one. The room was dim, the wine soft and warm. I watched him move, not with intention, but with that quiet confidence he wore like a second skin. Music played from the speakers. Something slow, instrumental. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. I laughed. A real, startled sound. "Don't be absurd." He held out his hand anyway. "Come on. Just for a minute." I stood because it was easier than refusing. He placed one hand on my waist. The other took mine. Our bodies didn't touch completely, but the space between us felt thinner than air. We swayed. Barely. My pulse moved faster than the music. My throat felt tight. His breath was close to my cheek. I closed my eyes for 1 second too long, and then I stepped back. "I should go to bed," I whispered. He nodded, but didn't move. I turned, walked to the stairs. My hands were trembling. In my room, I stared at myself in the mirror. The woman who looked back at me had color in her cheeks, a sheen in her eyes, a question pressed between her lips. I went to bed. I didn't sleep. The next morning, we acted as if nothing had happened. But I caught him watching me when I bent to pick up the mail. And he didn't pretend to look away. At noon, I found him in the garden, shirtless, dirt on his hands. He was fixing something I didn't ask to be fixed. I stood at the doorway too long. He looked up, said nothing. In the evening, he opened a bottle of wine without asking, poured it slowly. "Are you trying to get me drunk?" I asked, half joking. He smiled. "You never let yourself go. Not even a little. Someone has to be responsible. And someone has to make you feel alive." The silence after that was unbearable. We sat on the porch. The sky turned dark. The air smelled like rain. He reached for my hand. I didn't stop him. The kiss wasn't gentle. It was a question asked too late, a hunger that had waited too long. My body reacted before my mind could object. And then I wasn't thinking at all. The details blur. I remember the heat of his skin, the way the air felt charged wild, the sound of my own breath, ragged and unbelieving. It wasn't reckless. It was slow, deep. I dissolved. I don't remember who touched who first. Only that we stopped pretending. And then, the knock. 3 sharp, clear knocks on the door. We froze. Everything stopped. My pulse in my ears, my breath in my throat, his hands still against my waist. He stepped back. Just enough. I pulled my sweater tighter, fixed my hair, and opened the door. Anya stood on the porch, soaked in rain, eyes wide, mouth just slightly open. She looked at me, then at him, then back at me. The silence was louder than anything I'd ever heard. And then she screamed my name. She stood there, soaked to the skin, hair clinging to her face, her breath shallow, her eyes not blinking, and I couldn't move. Behind me, Ilya didn't speak. Didn't breathe, it seemed. The storm outside seemed quieter than the silence between us. "How long?" she asked. The words were not screamed. They were spoken. Flat. Precise. "Anya." She looked past me. "Get out," she said. I turned to him. He didn't argue. He didn't fight. He looked at me once, a look that held no apology, only something quiet and full. And then he left. The door closed behind him like a verdict. Anya didn't speak for several moments. She stood dripping on the floor, her bag forgotten at her feet. I reached for a towel. "Don't," she said. I froze. "Don't try to clean this up." I let the towel drop. "I trusted you." It wasn't a sentence. It was a wound. "I didn't plan it," I said. "But you let it happen." She sat on the edge of the armchair. I remained standing, the wall behind me the only thing holding me upright. For a long time, there were no words. Just air. Just breathing. Then finally, "Do you love him?" I swallowed. "I don't know what this is." That answer hurt her more than any confession might have. She stood, picked up her bag, walked to the door. I can't stay here. Anya, please. No, she said. Not now. Maybe not ever. The door closed again. This time, I was the one left behind. The days after were slow, weightless. No calls, no messages. Not from her. Not from him. I went through the motions. I swept the kitchen floor. I folded towels. I washed sheets that didn't need washing. But none of it filled the space inside me. Something had cracked open. Not just the illusion, but something deeper. I didn't cry. Not really. Tears came, yes. But they didn't ask for attention. They simply arrived. Like rain. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror. I stared. Not in shame. Not even regret. Just recognition. The woman in the reflection had done something irreversible. She had stepped outside the life she had been handed. And even if she paid for it, and she couldn't unstep. I tied my hair back. Wore a dress I hadn't worn in years. It wasn't about looking different. It was about not hiding. I walked to the market. I spoke politely. I bought apples and forgot to buy bread. I walked home slower than usual. In the afternoon, I sat on the porch and listened. To nothing. To birds, to wind, to the ache that had quieted into something else. Peace? No. Not yet. But space. And within it, the beginning of something. He didn't come back. I didn't expect him to. One envelope arrived a week later. No name. No return address. Inside was a single line written in pen. I do not want to be your shadow. I folded it, placed it in the drawer beside my bed. I didn't cry then either, because I understood. He had given me something I didn't know I still needed. To be seen. To be touched without being claimed. To be chosen without being owned. He wasn't my future. He wasn't my shame. He was the edge I had to walk to remember where I ended. Weeks passed. Then months. Anya didn't call. But she replied, eventually. A short message. Formal. Reserved. But it was a beginning. I didn't ask for more. Healing does not come in answers. Only in stillness. One evening, I looked at myself in the mirror again. I breathed in, then out. The house was quiet, but not heavy. And for the first time in years, I felt something like balance. Not happiness. Not forgiveness. But presence. This was not a return. It was a rebirth.